When I think about my life and where I am now and how I got here, my younger days, there was a time when I was very young, probably, I don't know, about 5 or 6 or something, and I remember just this feeling of real happiness. Getting up very, very early one morning because it was Christmas, and with my older sisters, of course, Jackie and Shirley. And it must have been about 5 a.m. And I just remember going into our living room and seeing our Christmas tree, which was, it was a fake tree, but it was nicely decorated, and it was silver leaves. I remember it was really quite striking. And my parents had laid out presents everywhere, really, and fruit as well. Lots of oranges and apples, and this is I could really remember. I remember the smell of citrus was very strong in the room, and it just felt really magical. I was very happy with my sisters, and after a while, my parents got up, and the citrus, the oranges and things, were probably because my parents were of that age that they grew up in really the post-war years, and when they really didn't have much, and probably to have fruit was, a big thing for them when they were kids. Especially after, my dad would have been about 9 when the Second World War ended. My mum would have been about 7. So they would have remembered what it would have been like to, go without and stuff. So we opened our Christmas presents, and it's been an abiding memory for me. Just that a time when I felt very happy and completely secure and in that family unit. Unfortunately, I think that's the only memory I've got of feeling like that. When I think back in my childhood, from the age I'm now, 58 tomorrow, and I've got a bit of perspective on my life. I wish my parents had been a bit more organised and had. I don't mean just having more, although we really didn't have much, and often we had very, very little, and really, it was grim at times. And I just wish my parents. It's not just about that. It's just I wish my parents had just been a bit more organised, and together. My overall memories of my father is almost like I never had the impression he was a bad person. I never felt afraid of him. But he and my mother they could pick a fight with each other very easily. I never saw my dad hit my mum, although I'm pretty sure she hit him. But it was as if he was just either completely unprepared for being a parent, or completely disinterested. And at some point he just crawled into a bottle, and that seemed to be his sole purpose for living. I mean, I'm not sure what it was in his life that made him like that. And conversely, my mum, Jesus, I used to feel sorry for her because I felt that her life really hadn't played out as she probably had hoped. I think her family just sort of fell apart, and she probably had a role in that. My sisters, who were, you know, 4 and 6 years older than I was, they were real tearaways. They caused a lot of trouble in their teenage years, and I don't really know how my dad reacted to that, but I know that my mum's reaction was to beat the living crap out of him, and she did it a lot. I almost once, when they were a bit older, I once saw my mother, for some reason or other, belting my sister Shirley, and Shirley must have been about, I don't know, in her late teens, and she just had enough. And one time she just, after getting walloped about the head a few times, she decided to fight back, and and it turned into like a fight, and I'm pretty sure my mother was seconds away from killing her, and I witnessed it, and I was stricken with terror and immobile. Oh, I could speak or move. I could just watch on in terror at what was unfolding before my eyes. And I don't know, my little sister, I don't know where she was. I don't remember her being in the room. My mum used to, if I said something she didn't like, she would belt me. Like haymaker swings to the side of your head, and you'd just be standing talking, and before you know it, there's a smack, and your ear is ringing, and feeling of being dazed, and I just wish there were. I don't know why my parents were like that. My dad was uninterested, and my mother was violent. And I once heard a psychologist talk about, in terms of how this affected me, a psychologist talk about the devouring mother, where a mother refuses to let her children grow up, or to have any responsibility, or be able to make decisions for themselves when as they're becoming older. And I'm talking about when they reach their early teen years, and as children do, they like to start making decisions about themselves. And it's one of the things I've learned as a parent. There's a process of letting go that you have to embrace as a parent. And my mum never did that. She just never ever let me do it. And I remember when I was old enough to finally sort of break free, and I was 21. That's how long it was. I was 21 when I said, "Look, I'm leaving home, and I'm going to get my own place." And my mother, of course, disapproved of this, and I don't remember that she actively voiced or tried to stop me or anything like that. Although she certainly voiced her disapproval, and she undermined me by throwing emotional barbs at me, and she said at one point said to me, because I was leaving, and the idea of me leaving home and going into the world, she said, "The world will eat you alive." And I was very unprepared for it, and in a lot of ways it did. It did chew me up a bit, and it took me, I floundered for at least a decade. So I wonder what the hell was wrong with my parents. I never hated them. I was desperate for my mum in particular just to love me back, and just give me a bit of encouragement. And I felt that I never ever got that. I was only, and I spent my entire teenage years just really not having a clue what I was meant to do, or I was given absolutely no academic encouragement. When I was 10, our family became Jehovah's Witnesses, and it was my dad that started it, and my mother was very resistant at first, but in the end she did sort of embrace it, to the point where she became a bit overbearing with it, and of course, and then she projected all of that onto me, and I wanted to be loved and liked, so I sort of embraced it as much as I could as well. But none of it left me, it was all just about me doing the right things for other people and trying to do as expected. And absolutely no one ever said to me, "Well, what is it you want?" or try to encourage me into choosing things that I might want. I never knew what I was meant to do, or even that I could do anything. So when I was about 8 or 9, maybe, at some point in the early to mid-70s, my father's sister, her name is Agnes, the same as my mother's name. My father's sister, Agnes, and her husband had immigrated to the United States in the mid-60s. At some point round about, I don't know if it was before or maybe just after I was born. They went off there and made a life for themselves, and they had a few kids, and apparently they had suggested, or I don't know, something happened and our family was going to go as well. And I remember, gosh, I was so excited. I remember telling my friends, we are going to America. And I was so excited. But of course it just didn't happen. For whatever reason, it fell through. I remember years later, my grandmother, my father's mother, her name was Molly, and it was maybe around about the time my dad died in the late 80s. I remember her telling me that we were talking about the America thing, and she, maybe I asked her about it or something. She said Ronnie, who was my Aunt Agnes's husband, Ronnie had arranged a job for my dad. He apparently worked in some factory, canning factory or something like that. You know, not anything super fantastic, but it was a living, you know. They had a nice house, and they lived in a place called Lacey, which is south of Seattle. And I think it's a sort of a kind of basic working class kind of town that maybe it's a bit ordinary, I don't know. But compared to what we had, I grew up in Rutherglen in the south of Glasgow. It was outside the city, but I think by the time I grew up, it became a young adult, it was incorporated into Glasgow. And Rutherglen just seemed to be like perennially in decline. Although it was, an old, hundreds of year old town, it just got subsumed by the city, and it was grim. Especially, when I left school, Margaret Thatcher was in her first year as Prime Minister of Britain. And, did I say the first year? She was in her first term as Prime Minister. And, her policies, she gets a lot of plaudits now, but at the time, her policies just created a recession. And I left school straight into that, and it was so grim. There was no money, and it was grim everywhere. And it shaped my worldview so much. And so even if we had moved even to somewhere like Lacey in south of Seattle in Washington State, I was pretty sure it would have been a heck of a lot better than what we had and what I grew up with. So, when I did leave home, I kind of felt sorry that I was leaving my little sister. My family is, I think there's 16 years between the eldest child and the youngest, so we're kind of spread out. 2 girls, and then a gap of a few years, and then a boy, me, and then a gap of 10 years until my little sister. And of course, when I left home, my eldest sister Jackie got pregnant when she was 16, which was in 1975, I think. My dad didn't take it well. I don't think my mum did either. Anyway, Jackie moved out. She got an apartment in Castlemilk, in the sort of rough part of it as well. And I think the guy who got her pregnant was from Castlemilk. And it was just the sort of really bad choices that teenage girls have made for decades. I'm pretty sure it ruined her life. I think she ended up having about 5 kids. She moved, to give you an idea of what her relationship with my parents ended up like, it was so poisoned by everything, you know. Jackie, my oldest sister, moved to Derby in England to be close to the father of her child's mother, because that was a better prospect than staying around in the south of Glasgow and trying to have a relationship with her own mother. Shirley, my second oldest sister, I think she got on a bus to London when she was about 18, and arrived. And the day she arrived, she got a live-in job as a nanny in some posh part of town, and and then I think she proceeded to. She did well for herself, but she lived off the seat of her pants for years. Moved from one job to the next and travelled around Europe and stuff like that. And she didn't have a good relationship. I don't think she spoke to my father again. I don't know why. And when she ended up, she lived in London for about a decade, and then she got pregnant. She was probably in her mid-30s or so. Came back to Glasgow. Lived with my mum. Was it? No, she went to Derby where Jackie was at first. Had her baby there, I think, if I remember rightly. This is all quite a while ago. Anyway, she had a baby. She went to Derby, tried to make a life for herself. But by this point, her older sister, because she went to Derby because that's where Jackie, my oldest sister, lived. But Jackie had a few kids, and her oldest kid, the one that was born in 1975 in Glasgow, was at that point probably about 16 or 18 or something, and she was trouble, right? And she apparently assaulted my sister Shirley, and Shirley just didn't feel safe. And left there and came back to Glasgow, really just trying to sort of find safety with her family. And so she lived with my mum for a while, and it got so bad that I actually offered to put her up, and she came and lived with me with my current partner at that time. And gosh, I can't. It was quite a while. I know that my partner got a bit fed up with it, but until she was able to get her own place. And my mother just poisoned it every time she got the chance, rather than accepting any of us. That was a perfect opportunity for her to because she'd lost her daughter. Shirley had gone away, and this was a chance for my mother to build a new relationship with her daughter. And for whatever reason, probably in the same way that I saw her do it with my father, she just undermined it all and pushed Shirley away. And I remember when I took Shirley in, arguing with my mother on the phone and saying, I am the only person who's willing to be there for Shirley. And her daughter, who's at that point was still a baby, she was less than a year old. And that was really, that point was like the beginning of the end um, of my relationship with my mother. That was probably about 1995 or 96. And I didn't speak to my mother again until probably about maybe 2004 or 2006, I can't remember. After I'd come to Australia and got married, started building a life for myself, and we decided to take a European holiday. We went to Italy, and I said, I think it would be nice for me to go back to Glasgow and just touch base with my family. And so we tagged on a side trip, got flights up to Glasgow, saw Shirley, saw her daughter Andy, which was lovely, and went to see my mum. She was living in that little house, still in Rutherglen, and she was, let me think, she must have been about 68, I think. She was kind of frail and a little bit vague. But we just went and spent an hour with her at her house and then left. And in that time, I just tried to be as pleasant as possible. But I could see her occasionally getting the little, even in her elderly, diminished state, I could see her still getting these little barbs in that I just, without being openly hostile, she was friendly, but she would say things that I knew were designed to plant seeds or whatever. And I would just ignore them and move on to smile and move on to the next thing, sort of thing. The last time I saw her, we left her house, and as I was getting into the car, I turned and looked towards the window, and I could see her with her hand up, covering her mouth, as if she was realizing that this was the last time she would ever see me. Because I was leaving and going back to Australia and probably wouldn't be around anytime soon. And it was the last time I saw her. My life in Australia is another thing altogether. But when I look back, I wonder why weren't they a little bit more organised? We could have had a good life. I don't know what was wrong with my dad. He gave my mother didn't work. I can only assume that neither of them got much of an education. Probably left school when they were 14 or 15 or something like that, with very basic education. I don't know about my dad. Sometimes I wondered if my mother could have benefited from going to university or something. I think she was smart enough to be capable of it. I can imagine that my mother's life, having married my father, and he, for whatever reason, just turned out to be a disappointment, made her angry and disappointed, and that fed through to her relationships and her relationships with her children and how she was as a parent. Neither of them were, they weren't evil as, you hear some awful parents can be. But my mother was definitely, she was for me, incredibly emotionally abusive. And it left me indelibly scarred. I've never got over it. And when I think about it, because this is something I've found, maybe other people do it. As you get older, you just reflect on your life and wonder if things had been different. If things had been different for me, they could have been different. They could have been a lot better. I just wish they'd been a bit more together. But I'll never know why. I don't know what was wrong with my dad. I really don't know. He once, I've got memories of, like climbing on his knee when I was a kid and that sort of stuff. And he never played with me, for example. Like never. I could probably recount a couple of instances where he would try to give me advice, and it was some sort of like a one-shot deal. Like he was trying to give me a bit of advice that would take him a minute to say, and that would be it for my life. Rather than trying to create a steady, safe environment for his children so that they could grow up confident, inquiring, and learning. We never get any of that. I didn't get any of that at all. He was just, it was as if he was just not interested. And I've often wondered if he was damaged in some way. I remember when I was probably maybe about 10 or 12 or something like that. I asked him, I told him about a song I liked, and I said, "Oh, this is such a good song. Do you like it?" And he was like, "No." And it's like, "Well, why not?" And he's like, He said, "I don't like music." And who says that? Really, who? I've never heard anyone ever say that in my entire life. And I doubt you have either, if you're watching this. It's just like insane. I don't like music. Who doesn't like music? There was something wrong with them. There's something wrong with my dad. And I think my mother made it worse, whatever it was. And maybe that's why he... Some of my earliest memories, like when I said I climbed on his knee, he had his dad's chair that he always sat in. And there was always, or almost always, I can remember a can of beer on the floor next to his chair, because they didn't have a side table or anything, you know, like this. He didn't have anything like that. He put his can on the floor next to his armchair where he watched TV. Always, so I knew that he liked drinking. And this is, and I'm talking about my memories of when I was about 4 or 5. I could remember that he had a can of beer on the floor. And he would drink it. And I didn't see him drunk. I think maybe I saw my father drunk once. He came home pissed. And this is probably when I was in my mid to late teens. And my mother tried to stop him coming into the living room because she didn't want the kids, or me and Fiona. Fiona was my youngest sister. She didn't want us to see my dad like that. And, after a bit of back and forth, I remember I couldn't see, but I could hear. He was swearing at her, and she was just trying to placate him and usher him into the bedroom, which she did because she always, got her way. And he went into the bedroom, fell asleep, and I think that was the only time I ever saw him drunk. But I don't know if he was destined to become like a flat out alcoholic, or if it was because he had the predilection for it. It was certainly there. He could have done it on his own, or he just liked a beer, and the misery of being with my mother forced him to become a full-time alcoholic. But, when he left home, of course they separated when I was about 11 or 12, and he went off. He got a place of his own, like a room in some doss house. He kept his job. He got a place that was close to where he worked, and he lived there and kept his job. Went to the pub, which all seemed to be in very close proximity to each other. So he could walk to work and go at the pub on the way home, and then stagger home and puke in the sink before he'd fallen asleep, which he did. When I saw that when he died, and I went to his little bedsit place just to, I don't know, with the idea of cleaning up his stuff. I didn't really know what to do. There was a sink there, and it was full of dried vomit from the night before. So I get the impression that, I don't know, that was just his life. But the point is, he kept that. He didn't become like a homeless alkie. He kept his job, he kept his apartment, or his little place, and sent very little money back to my mum. And so we had nothing. This isn't just an opportunity for me to complain, but I feel it's important to understand for me to talk through it. I don't have a psychologist or anyone I can speak to, but I do often wonder. I think about my life, and I wonder, what if it was just a little bit different? Not massively, just a couple of little tweaks here and there. That would have been nice. I remember as a kid going to other people's houses and and just being impressed with mother and father being in the same room together and interacting in a normal, friendly way. And almost wishing that I could have that. Or, they had a car or a nice house with nice things. And, just that a feeling of being close-knit and in it together. And we never had that. I noticed that a lot when I was younger. Not that I could ever, because of the way my mother was, I never felt that I could ask her about these things or comment on it, because it would have brought a response of such negativity that I was afraid to voice anything that might bring my mother's anger about. So I didn't. I just learned to shut up and not say anything. I think by the time I left home, gosh, I feel as if any bright future had already been stamped out of me by that point. So when I left, it was an opportunity for freedom. I was sorry that I abandoned my little sister to stay with my mum, and it would just be her and my mum. By this point, my father was dead, and my elder sisters were elsewhere. But the opportunity just to be free and to live, it was... For me, it was just an opportunity to enjoy freedom, but without any thought of my own future. What was I going to do? Could I get a job? Well, I'd already spent years in an economic environment where there were no jobs, and the only jobs I could get were very basic sort of labour type jobs where I was earning the bare minimum. I'd never been encouraged to think about further education or trying to pursue, get a proper education so I could pursue a vocation or have a career as opposed to a job. I never thought of that until I remember not long after I applied to one of the technical universities to study photography, and it came. Not that I was particularly good at photography or anything like that, but someone had gifted me a little 35mm camera, and I'd taken a bunch of photographs with it, and some of them were good, but enough for me to think, I didn't understand anything about photography, but it was enough to make me think, maybe I could do that. But the letter inviting me, the interview at the Technical University came just at the time where I moved out of the house, and I was distracted with other things, and I didn't go to the interview. And I feel as if that one wasn't me. I had an opportunity and I fluffed it. And after that, I didn't really have any more. I didn't understand enough. I was too narrow in my thinking to really know that I should take the opportunity. The time was, when you get older, you realise that there's not infinite time. Time is limited, and of course I didn't know that. I didn't realise that, and I just wasted time by enjoying my freedom. I was broke, but I'd always been broke. I didn't know any better. But I just enjoyed the freedom, not doing anything particularly interesting or rewarding, hanging out with friends, going clubbing, playing guitar, listening to music. Living without the overbearing eyes of my mother. I feel as if it's been largely a wasted life between then and now. Don't get me wrong, so a lot of good things have happened to me, and becoming a parent was probably the single greatest thing. Besides getting married. Getting married was probably the most fulfilling thing that ever happened to me. I'd been in a couple of long relationships before that, but getting married, not just the act of getting married, or even this what it symbolised, but I think getting married, the person I married was someone I really admired and respected and learned a lot from. And I think I invested so much in it, like picking up roots and moving to Australia for Carleen. It was full of possibility for me. And like all the best romances, I saw it as us against the world, or us taking the world on together. That sort of bond. I see that as, I don't know, maybe I just wasn't, maybe everything that had come before hadn't had left me charming enough to be attractive enough for her to fall in love with me and marry me. But maybe everything that had come before hadn't left me with what it took to be the kind of husband that she wanted. So some good things have happened to me, and despite the roadblocks that I had before, I feel as if my life is in its last chapter. I'm 5 years older than my father was when he died. I'm not an alcoholic, and I remember about a year before he died, I remember my father telling me he was, the doctors wanted to give him a heart and lung transplant. I'm not like that, but I have diabetes. I feel as if that's about to take its toll. We'll see.